listen, one of the worst places in the world you can go is family court. It doesn't have to be that way.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You probably think if you just tuned in, well, that's a weird way to start the show. It's true. Now, look, there are really some hot spots in the world that you don't want to be in. And this is a rather gross exaggeration that I'm making here. But all you have to do is spend 5 or 10 minutes in any states, or any communities, any jurisdiction's family court, and you will say to yourself, whew, that requires Xanax. Not that I jumped to Xanax. I'm just saying it's a tough place. And to be honest with you, and this is knock wood, I'm surprised that we don't hear more bad news coming out of those places. Every time I visit a family court scene, and I've done so more as a follower of news stories, and I'm lucky to have a happy marriage. I know people who don't and have participated or provided witness to or just support to those who do not. Whew, boy, because it's the kids that are really at the core of this challenge. And we've got some pending legislation here in Rhode Island, which, you know what, I know this is a surprise, but Rhode Island's kind of behind the times on this concept. My guest here is here to talk about that. Now, you're watching this program on Wednesday. Welcome in. Thank you for joining. We've had some scheduling rearrangements this week. You'll find all the shows this week are brand new and original, but this program was actually recorded yesterday, and so I'm unable to react to the president's presentation last night and/or Donald Trump's press conference, but in due time we shall. And don't forget, there's always the radio from 3 to 6 on WPRO for real-time reaction to the news. So this particular conversation stems from some things we've read both on email and in the newspaper, and we'll show you a couple of headlines here. This is our guest, and he wrote an op-ed piece which I thought was pretty provocative in the Providence Journal. There are a couple of other headlines here that we can share, and there he is again in the Johnston paper getting some attention for his project here. That, by the way, is just some language out of the Massachusetts court system regarding this. Years and years ago, back in the early mid-90s, I was all over this issue because there were some really bad mishaps that I think were sponsor of the legislation in Massachusetts to mandate that divorcing parents get some counseling because the kids suffer. Tim is here to talk about that. Welcome to the broadcast. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You are, for a living, doing what?
I am a writer and editor. I work in corporate communications here in Rhode Island.
Okay. And you're a divorced dad, correct?
That's correct.
All right. But we're not going to sit here and talk about your family issues. I mean, your family deserves privacy, and so does your employer. How'd you get into this conversation?
Well, going through the process myself. I had my own experience in the legal system, not to be confused with the justice system, and came out of it and thought, you know, I'm not content to just sit back and think, you know, someday someone will do something about it. What I'm doing here with Aaron Regunberg, I believe, is the right thing to do. I have the time and the opportunity to
Aaron is
dedicate
a state representative out of
yes.
Providence who you expect to file legislation on this
Correct.
subject matter, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So I had the time and energy to devote, you know, this to the effort.
Okay. We listen here on the show. You said legal system, not necessarily justice system. What do you mean?
Well, because as you indicated in your introduction, family court is a very difficult place. A lot of emotion, a lot of pain, a lot of frustration involved in the people there, you know, and the time. When you go to family court, you sit, you get a number, you wait your turn. It's like the deli, you know, and you wait to be called and go in and have your time before the judge. And sometimes that can be 10 minutes, sometimes that can be 3 hours. So that's a lot of time that I was able to just sit and talk to people, waiting their turn and hearing their stories. And as I'm sure a lot of, you know, people who are watching your program who have been through a divorce can tell you, they have a story and they just want to be heard. They want someone to listen to.
You know, that's fascinating because you know, I'm a pretty private person. I had one experience I've talked about on the radio where I was, caught for speeding, and went in and felt it terribly uncomfortable to actually even talk to the judge about that particular case, because there's 72 other people in the room, all of whom have their own gripes and really don't care about you, but are interested, because the human nature is to be interested. It was quite the playhouse, that particular story. Someday I might retell it on the radio. My point is that I have seen family court and thought to myself, oh boy, how hard is it, even in the confines of a courtroom, non-broadcast, of course, generally, but even in the confines of a courtroom, to be laying it all out in front of a judge in what is a public forum.
Who doesn't know you, doesn't know your children,
Never
doesn't
mind
know
that,
the
and the number of
situation.
people who are also, who also have their numbers, who may or may not be at least proximate to the actual courtroom and/or in the hallways, and everyone seems to be in everybody's underwear in that place, right?
Right.
And it's really disturbing.
Yeah.
Never mind all of the systemic issues with a marriage and their children, and the crumbling human condition that is involved with that. I have tremendous empathy for people who go through divorces, and I'm not so sure the court system. I think there are judges who do a really good job in trying to every day wake up with empathy, but there are people too, and it can be a mess.
Well, let me tell you, the first judge that I was in front of in family court was hearing the case, and at a certain point he said to me, now if I find out that there's parental alienation going on here, you're not going to like what I do about it. Well, he was correct. He did nothing, and I didn't like it. Now, I have sympathy for His Honor because of the position that he's in.
Parental alienation.
Parental alienation is the corruption of the relationship between a child and one of his or her parents. It's the indoctrination of the child into the unwarranted view that the other parent is not deserving of respect or love or time or contact. And when you have a child custody case, not just with divorcing couples, but when you have a couple that is separated or a couple that is unmarried and has a child in a child custody case, oftentimes the pain and the grief and the anger and the bitterness and the resentment of the divorce that spills out into how the two parents treat each other and their failures sometimes to co-parent or to parent in parallel, to communicate well, to collaborate well, and this has a devastating effect on the children. Parents who refuse to co-parent or do not communicate well or do not collaborate put their own children at risk for anxiety, depression, poor school performance, even substance abuse and self-harm.
Right. Let me just deftly, and you handle this the way you want to, because I have no intent to probe into your family situation.
Okay.
However, clearly you've had life experience, and I'm guessing that your life experience advises your mission here, correct?
It does. The point about the story with the judge, who said if I find out it's going on, you're not going to like what I do about it, is that there really isn't anything that he can do. He cannot compel two people who are getting divorced to take a class or a workshop or a seminar in co-parenting, because that marketplace doesn't exist in Rhode Island because it's not required by law. Now, it's important to make a distinction here. This resolution that Aaron and I are working on is not to make it the law as it is in 17 other states, including our neighbors, Massachusetts and Connecticut, that all divorcing parents of children 18 and under have to take some type of education module. That's not what this is. This resolution is to create a study commission, a commission of 10 people of a different professional backgrounds to study and assess what are the most effective, what are the best education modules for parenting after divorce, and how could we implement them here in Rhode Island.
Okay. That's not what I thought your goal was.
Okay.
When we come back, I'll tell him why he's going down the wrong path. Stay with us. But if you've been watching the program, if you missed the first segment, go back to foxprovidence.com, or if you're watching at 7:30 on MyRide TV, catch it at midnight on Fox Providence, of course. You see this show 2 times a night. Tim and I aren't going to have friendly disagreement over principle, philosophy, goal, but maybe ways to get there. Let's lay out a couple of stipulations here. Massachusetts and Connecticut are amongst the 17 states that can require a divorcing couple to go through some education at their expense, and they have to prove that they've been through the classes or the seminar or the consultation that says, hey, mommy and daddy have to make sure that there's no parent alienation here, and let me explain what goes. And they learn, and I've seen the classes, and I've covered stories on this in Mass and Connecticut where, parents walk out of there going, oh man, thank you, because it gets back. Most divorcing parents think they're doing the right thing by their kids, even though they know their kids are suffering.
I'd agree with
But they don't spend a lot of time worrying about really digging deep, looking at the signs, and making sure they do the foundational work that it's actually effective. So in Mass and Connecticut, they have forced the issue. You don't want your bill, and it's been done through legislation. So, for instance, in Connecticut, it's $125 per person to take a mandatory Connecticut parenting education program. In Massachusetts, the cost can depend on who's providing it, but every county has their own place that you go. If you're divorcing in Hampden County, Massachusetts, there's a place that you go.
Oh, yes.
You want the legislation to resolve that we study this particular matter, correct?
Correct.
I think that's a terrible mistake.
Why is that?
Let me wind that back. Let me not hyperbolize. I think that's ill thought out, because anytime you say study in this state, it hits the shelf. Do you want? Let me ask you this: is your goal to force the hand of divorcing parents to get an outsider view as to their kids' health and welfare in this process? Do you want that to be law? Do you want that judge to be able to execute that by authority? Yes or no?
Well, I don't think, if we could wave a magic wand and say, we're going to make it the law tomorrow in Rhode Island, that you must take some type of information or education module, whatever we want to call it, a class or a workshop,
Right.
then naturally a marketplace would arise, supply and demand in this state. Perhaps, vendors who do this in Massachusetts, would cross the state line, come into Rhode Island, and start offering these classes.
In a nanosecond.
But the point, yes, of course. But the point is that, is it worth it to do that if we don't have a perspective on what the most effective modules are?
Well, I'm sure
in
you can
terms
check
of
the-
style and content,
Sure.
curriculum, and so forth.
Well, look. Rhode Island can be late, but the new and improved, versus Massachusetts and Connecticut. But have you done any diligence in terms of what the, for lack of a better term, success rates are in Connecticut and Mass with the programs that they mandate?
There is no, that I can find, there is no sort of body of research evidence that evaluates efficacy of one type of class versus another. I could point you to a professor out in Arizona. His name is Erwin Sandler, and he has a program called New Beginnings. And it's a long program for parents, exactly what we're trying to talk about. And he followed up with families and also with kids, and on his own was able to get a satisfaction rate, a success rate, if you will. We have it, and he claims that he has a 90+ success rate from families and children.
I wouldn't dispute that.
Neither would I. But the point of the study commission would be to bring people together, almost like a Plato's Republic situation, to say, okay, we're going to starting from scratch. If we were to devise the most effective curriculum and programming to teach this kind of thing, what would it look like? What would it look like for parents who show some sign of being able to work together, so may only need a class that's a few hours long? What would it look like for parents who show the opposite, that they show signs of not being able to work together and might require an education module that's 5 or 6 weeks long? What would it look like?
It's interesting because for the parents who are, maturely separating, from each other, who actually do have the best interest of their children in mind and have common ground there, who then have to go to a 3-hour or 3-day or whatever it happens to be course that they have to suffer through, because been there, done that, get it. Too bad. I want the people who are completely not oriented to this problem with their kids to have the cold shower and get enough of what they need. And you're saying, well, what is it? What is it? What do they need in order to be able to make the whole thing effective? Look, I don't want to bog you down in this conversation arguing procedure and semantics to a goal that I think is absolutely worthy. I would just advise you to think about another tact, to get a damn law written that mandates that allows a judge to mandate a program, and the program can be determined by some state agency and or the courts to change or to be flexible. But if you don't get in there arguing for a bill to solve a crisis, and I would imagine it's a continual crisis in family court, then I think you'll be spinning your wheels for a long period of time. That's just my reaction to that. And for those of you who are watching this show who have gone through divorce or no divorce of some kind, I'd love to get your perspective on this, because what we should stipulate to is that it's a mess. It's a mess, and the courts that don't have this mechanism and that place where a judge can say, okay, you two, this is where you're going, either by discretion or by mandate, I think offer the children nothing.
Well, anecdotally, friends of mine and colleagues who have been divorced in Massachusetts, who had to take, these classes, which are required regardless of whether the divorce is contested or not.
That's my point.
They go in and take it. They have come back to me and said, you know what, I was a little reluctant to do it, but I knew that I was doing it with my former spouse, and I'm glad that we did it, because we came out of it, we had a shared language, a shared experience, so that we were able to say, remember what the instructor said, remember what they showed us, remember what we saw, and it allows two people to just sort of come and say, okay. Because I think you're right. I think most divorcing parents do not wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do things today that will give my child psychological issues for the rest of their lives.
But they do wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to get that SOB.
And they do not realize the effect that this has on their children. And I think that's one of the benefits of these kinds of modules.
Right, we'll talk more about it. I'll give you an example comes to mind of the perfunctory nature of this and why I think it doesn't matter. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. Lexi just said something during the break because she's academic type. You get hooked up with my producer. You guys can go all day talking about this solution. We're talking about the courts. We're talking about states where there's mandatory seminar and or consultation required for divorcing parents for the benefit of their children. And Lexi was just saying to you, what did you say? It's like a PhD course, to figure out what the best way to go about this is. And I can't agree more. But if you guys spend all this time, trying to puff this thing up and making it perfect or making it, the best dressed way to get about this conflict resolution and to benefit the kids, you will spend all that time doing that in theory. You'll never get a damn bill done. You know what I liken this counseling to for divorced parents issued by the court? Most of us who work in corporate America have to go through the annual sexual harassment video. It's like, well, it's like, okay, the staff meeting's being called, and the sexual harassment video is going to be played, and usually it's goofy. Usually it's, very affected, and people are kind of, going through their roles, but they don't feel like they're real, and everyone kind of rolls their eyes. But there's something that reminds you of something during the thing, whether it be 10 minutes or an hour or whatever it happens to be, where you say, you know what, good point. Good point. And everyone said, listen, I'm not sexually harassing anybody in the building, but after you see the movie, you're actually a little bit more wary of people's thoughts, feelings,
Right.
I think that if you work on making sure that the courts have something to mandate that can be revised with expertise, and you could add study to the language, that there's a flexibility on programming, fine. But to your anecdote, I never met parents who, whether they were getting along and not contested or at each other's throats wanting to kill each other, who didn't tell me it was good to see.
Oh, absolutely.
It was good to see, or good to talk it through, depending on what the mechanism was,
Right.
Whether it was a film or whether it was a counselor or whatever.
I'll give you another good example from a video I saw that I think was produced in Australia, and for parents. And the bulk of it was children from 7, 8, to 18, 19, talking about what the experience of divorce and what the experience of parental alienation was like for them. And they had on a 7, 8-year-old boy. And he said, for a while I thought it would be better if I were dead, because then my mother and father wouldn't fight about me all the time. Now, you show me a parent who would sit and watch that and not be stopped cold, and think twice about and say, what kind of effect is this having, on my child? Now, to be sure, there are some parents out there who are determined to not co-parent with their former spouse, to alienate the children against them.
Perhaps for good reason, by the way.
Well, that's a whole nother, that is
Sometimes
true.
he's dangerous or she's dangerous and da-da-da. And so you've got to be able to carve out responsible alienation without the angst and the animus.
Right.
And mommy, like mommy's a drug addict or daddy's a bank robber, but you got to find a way that Johnny doesn't hate them for it. Da da da.
Bear in mind that parental alienation is usually defined as indoctrinating the child to the unwarranted view.
Correct.
Or encouraging the child to have a reaction to the other parent that is grossly disproportionate to anything that the other parent has said or done. But I think we agree. It sounds like we agree that when you, are guided through a module by a moderator or two instructors, and they sit down and they show, look, we understand divorce is difficult, it's painful, it's frustrating, but there are things that you can do that can help your kids and yourselves, get through it. Because if you don't do it, the toll on the family is devastating.
We're short on time. You're suggesting that there's not a lot of that product and service available in the state right now, right?
I'm saying that
typical counseling.
I'm saying that the awareness on this issue needs to be raised. We need to start having a discussion about what we can be doing better for families of divorce, especially for children, as opposed to just having a DVD at the family court that we make people sit and watch, and they tune out for a half an hour and then they go back to whatever they were going to do.
But I would say that if all you can get right now is the mandated DVD,
that's what you would say.
Then mandate it. Mandate it. That's the thing. And by the way, the conversation is important for a couple of reasons. Look, how this legislation gets through, and I hope it does in some productive way, this conversation, hopefully, if you're in the middle of a divorce right now, will just reorient you to remember the kids first.
Absolutely.
Kids first, kids first, kids first, kids first. Because the damage is long-standing. We'll stay in touch on this and get you on the radio as well. Good work,
Wonderful.
man. It's really good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing the orientation. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. Tim and I were just saying, listen, this is a no-brainer. I can't believe after reading, I had forgotten to remember that Rhode Island doesn't have a mandated program in the family court for mom and dad to have to start thinking about the kids by judicial directive. This needs to get into the hopper. You know that thing, that phrase we often talk about? There ought to be a law. There ought to be a law. Most times there doesn't have to be a law. This one, there ought to be a law. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock on WPRO and back here tomorrow night. Bye-bye.